Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 7 of Straight Talk No BS. I am Lendrea.
It's your girl, Crys.
And today we're going to be talking about breaking generational curses. I mean, every family, I'm sure, has some kind of generational curse. We may not identify with it, we may not even recognize it. But today we're going to be talking about it. So stay tuned. I hope you listen to the end.
Absolutely. Let me tell you, I don't know if anyone knows what generational curses are, but it could mean a multitude of things. It really could just mean anything that you feel in your life or in your family that you want to stop doing. Something that you felt like affected your family so much that you don't want to continue to do anymore. So for me, I've identified at least 3 to 4 things that I've seen or witnessed in my family that I want to avoid in my future or in my family moving forward. One of those things are like what? Something, it could be something as small as, I'll start off real small, but stuttering. So my family on my father's side has this stuttering problem, and it stems from my grandfather, from his dad, from my dad, to some of my uncles, to me, to now to my son. How it was handled though was different. They didn't care about it. They just was like, oh, this is what I do. This is what, God gave me. I'm gonna live with it, and I'm gonna, move on with my life. For me, I was confused. I was embarrassed as a kid. I hated stuttering. So I wanted to teach myself how to stop stuttering, right? How can I change that for myself? So I taught myself. There's certain words I cannot say, certain words I won't say because I know I stutter. For my kid, I put him in speech therapy. I had someone teach him how to do it because I saw him also going through the same things when he was younger, feeling embarrassed, not wanting to speak, people making fun of him. It's embarrassing. So that's one of the generational curses that I broke. You have one that you could share?
Well, I do. The one for me, well, when I found out we was going to have a conversation about this topic, I actually had to sit back and reflect for a minute to see if I can identify with certain curses, you would say. So for me, the one that stood out the most was, I would call it like a pattern. So in my childhood, well, during my childhood, my grandmother, my mother's mother, I recall a period of years where my grandmother and my mother had a falling out. I don't know what about because I was a child, but I recall them not speaking for years, for years. And it was just, it became the norm. So then when I became young teenager, my mother and I had a similar relationship where we just didn't get along. And in my early 20s, my mother and I didn't speak for over a decade, for over a decade. So when I became a mother and I had my daughter, I remember my children asking me about my mother. They knew who she was, but they hadn't had no relationship with her. So for me, I remember not even identifying with seeing that generational curse, you would say, but I actually only put that together, I want to say a few years back, where I was like, wow, I did not see the similarities between my mother didn't have a good relationship with her mother. I didn't have a good relationship with my mother. I had a fantastic relationship with my father, but I struggled with my mother. Um, Me having a daughter, I did not want there to be any issues between her and I. So for my daughter, or even for both of my children, I am very conscious of expressing love, expressing appreciation, being present, because when I look back at my childhood, I cannot even remember a time of ever hearing my mother say, I love you. I remember my father because he was always present, but I cannot recall a moment at all of my mother ever saying, I love you. So when I became a mother, when my children were babies, I remember a period of being affectionate because they were babies. Like you're just naturally affectionate to babies. But as they got older, I remember my emotions, the emotional side of me wasn't as in tune as when they were babies. And I couldn't identify with what it was. And it was only, I want to say about maybe a decade ago or 12 years ago was when I started recognizing it, where now I'm so aware that I have this rule in my house that when my children and I hug, we have to hug where our hearts touch for 10 seconds, where I'm very aware of making sure I tell them that I love them or showing them that I love them or being present. So I want to say for me, my generation curse was seeing the, I guess I would say, seeing the pattern of my grandmother, my mother's side, and my mother didn't speak for years. I don't know why that I actually I apologize. I found out why 12 years ago, but they had a very, I mean, they didn't speak. I remember my childhood was the absence of my grandmother, my mother's side. And then myself and my mother, we didn't speak for over 10 years. And even prior to that, as being a young teen, it was a struggle. Anyone that was ever close to me knows it was a struggle with my mother and I having a relationship. So when I became a mother myself with my daughter, I did not want to bring those habits or that pattern into me raising my daughter. So I would say that's one generational curse that I broke, that I'm proud to say I broke. But I had to teach myself um, and to find the tools to break it, to allow me to be emotional and compassionate, to show compassion. Yeah, that's my
Very
one.
good.
Hmm?
Very good. So that's very good. That was a good one.
Yeah, but we don't really identify with things. Like if we hadn't discussed, we're going to talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have actually taken the time. Like, I mean, I knew, I knew about it, but I was like, let me just sit back one night and just really go back down memory lane. And I was like, whoa, we don't really see the patterns. And to even say that, I'm sure my mother had her reasons for not speaking with her mother. The same way at that time, I had my reasons for not speaking with my mother for over 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was so permanent, that feeling where I was like, no matter how many times my father begged me, I mean, begged me to forgive my mother, I wouldn't. I was just hell bent on nope, not happening. So I can say that even though, how can I put this? We're gonna pause. I'm gonna start crying.
Oh man.
No, one
See,
second.
it's a good topic to talk about because it makes people realize and really think about like what it is that really affected them that they really want to change.
All right, so okay, I'm collected. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so my mother and I didn't speak for 10 years. This is in my late teens, early 20s. Prior to that, I actually felt and thought my mother hated me with a passion. That's all I ever felt from her.
Mm-hmm.
So she was on her own since she was 14, my mother. I don't know why, we never had that discussion, but the way the story goes, my mother was on her own from Bacaton, that's what he's called Bermuda, since she was 14. And then she had my oldest brother when she was 16. And at that time, she never finished school. She never had a GED or nothing like that. but she was out on the streets surviving however she had to survive. And then she met my father. So after they got married and she had me, as the years went on, like I don't know, I just felt like, I always felt that my mother treated me harder than my brothers. And I assumed it was because at that time I was the only girl. But we butted heads with everything. I mean, everything was awful. So when I left him at 16. And coincidentally, my mother had already left him when she was like 14. And I left when I was 16. I left him. I was on my own ever since because the relationship I had with her, I left. Um, my daughter now is 16. And I tell her and my son, you know, I would never put them out. They can stay home as long as they need to. And if we're having communication issues or anything, you know, we talk about it, like we talk about our feelings. So it was only, I would say, a week before my father passed, which was 12 years ago. And like I said previously, he's always begged me and said to me, forgive your mother. And I wouldn't. I just wouldn't. You know, as far as I was concerned, I looked at my mother as she was dead to me. And that's how I lived my life. And a week before he passed, he had called me and he confided in me and told me why my mother was the way how she was. And what we don't do in families is have those uncomfortable conversations about experiences that either our parents have experienced or our grandparents. So in this case, my father had called me one night, I remember a week before he passed, and he had called telling me about being a parent as a mother stuff. And then he was like, you have to forgive your mother. And I'm like, you know, still hell bent on, nope, not gonna happen. No matter what you tell me, it's not gonna happen. And then he explained to me my mother's life and some of the things she had experienced. And I never knew. Now here I am, a mother of two, an adult, divorced, raising my own children. And I never knew the history of my mother. But I understood once I learned the history, why my father, no matter what, always protected her, no matter what. Even though they were divorced and they had been married about 25 years and then they got divorced, um, no matter what, he always made sure we, his children, um, never disrespected her. He never disrespected her. He never talked negative about her. And with times he had more than enough reasons to talk negative about her, but he never did. He never talked negative about her. He always made sure we respected her, and he never allowed us to talk negative about her. And if we did, he would either tell us, no, that's your mother, no, quit it. So
Right,
once I
right.
found out, right. So once I found out why my mother was the way she was, I wished that she had, I don't know if I want to say trusted us enough, but I wish she would have disclosed her journey in life. Because maybe if she had shared her journey in life, she would have been able to experience that true love. You know, I know my father loved unconditionally no matter what he did. And, but as far as us as the children, you know, we never experienced, and I'm speaking for myself, I can't really speak for my siblings, but for myself, and having been the only girl at that time, I never felt love for my mother. She never expressed love towards me. But when I found out, I first heard for the first time my mother's journey, during that time, I want to say a week later, my father passed. And I struggled with knowing the truth now. And then my mother took sick. And when my mother took sick, um, she had to be flown out here to Lehigh Clinic, and she was out here for a year, going through treatments and one, and she almost died. She was in a coma, and a lot of stuff was going on, and the family was at odds, and they wanted me to travel to Boston every weekend to be with her. And I struggled. I remember struggling being by my mother's side during her sickness when she almost died. I couldn't bring myself to be with her. And I don't know what happened, but I kept thinking about the conversation my father and I had. And I forced myself to pack up my car with my kids. And I remember we drove to Boston, and it took us about 4 hours to get there late night. We left about 11 o'clock at night, and I got there about maybe 3, 4 in the morning, checked into a hotel and went to go see her. And when I walked in when I went into the rehab center, I went into our room to go see her, every emotion that I had that made me despise her, it left my body. And I remember asking my children, I remember sending my children to get something to eat with one of the nurses. And she was shocked to see me. And I told her I needed to talk to her. And I remember sitting there on the edge of her bed, and I told her I needed her full attention to just hear me out. I need to talk to her. And I remember telling her exactly how she made me feel all my life. And I remember going through the list of everything she ever did, how it made me feel. But I also told her that I forgave her. And as always, the person that's the giver that gives you all the bad crap, they don't really want to recall anything. Her recollection wasn't as sharp as mine, but it is what it is. But the point of it was, I wanted to tell her I forgive her. And I remember holding her.
Take your time.
I remember holding her and telling her how sorry I was and that I forgive her. I remember telling her first, I forgive her for everything that's ever happened. And I understood why she was the way she was. And I didn't blame her for anything. That's just all she knew. You know what I'm saying? She knew how to defend and protect, but she didn't know how to love. But I understood why. And I told her I forgive her. And I held her tight. And I remember crying. And I remember her saying to me, "Come on now, Lendrea, stop crying. Stop crying." And then she was like, I love you, right? I love you and the babies. You guys mean the world to me. And do you know that was the first time my mother had ever said how she loves me? And then after that day, she never stopped saying it. It's like what I lacked all my life. That day when I forgave her and told her her actions made me feel, and I held her tight, and I remember telling her, I'm so sorry for everything she's ever experienced in life, and that I'm here and that I love her and I'm not going anywhere. I think she needed that too, to hear that.
Yeah.
I remember holding her so tight, and we just cried. And I remember her saying she loves me, and I remember saying I love her. And everything I felt in me that was negative towards her, it just disappeared. And this happened, I want to say about, my father's been past 12 years now. She took sick about a year or two after him. Um, and now currently, God works in mysterious ways, because after that, my mom was diagnosed with dementia, and it's gotten worse. and she actually has aggressive dementia. But prior to it getting to the point where it is now, the stage where it is now, that was another reason why I flew to Bermuda as often as I did, where I wanted my kids and I to spend as much time as possible with her. And that was the best decision I ever made. And every time we went to visit her at the nursing home, you know, everything was Sequana Sanaya, and she expressed love. And I saw a side of my mother that I never saw. I saw her being a loving mother and loving grandmother. So I say that to say all this. Generational curses, if we actually just pause for a minute, especially when it comes to our parents, and we may have these really awful relationships with our parents, I can promise you that it's a reason why your parents are the way how they are, that they haven't discussed it with you. It's something they've experienced in their life, their childhood, something's happened that if you, as uncomfortable as you may want to, or as comfortable as it may make you, try to have that conversation to find out what it is. Because once you find out what the reason is as to why they are the way how they are, why they be the lack of emotion, the lack of compassion, the lack of communication, it's a reason. And I'm seeing that from my own story with my own mother. Anyone that was close to me in my early teens, late teens, they know exactly the relationship I have with my mother. They knew it was bad, it was awful. Everybody feared her and it was awful. And if my father never had just told me the truth and told me my mother's story and her journey and sacrifices she made and accomplishments she made, she went from being on her own since she was 14 to having a child when she was 16, to not having her GED, not being educated, to making it her priority to get her GED, which she did accomplish it. And she went off to college, she did her courses and whatnot, where, she didn't allow her circumstances to define who she is. And she did that, and her protective nature that she had was on 200. I mean, I'm not gonna front about that. I mean, when she listened, don't look at her kids funny, don't talk about her kids. That's one thing she knew how to do, is protect and defend. I mean, gosh, poof, that's a whole nother bunch of stories of that one. But I would say to anybody listening, if you're struggling with your relationship with your parents, especially, sit down with them or ask other family members to get the answers so you can have a better understanding as to why they are why they are. And if you know that information, you know exactly what you can do to better the relationship and not so much hate them or despise them for their actions. You have a better understanding. Because for me, had I known what I know now, I look back now and think, well, damn, I wasted over a decade of having no involvement with my mother at all, no involvement, um, by not understanding her. Had I known the information, or even had she shared it with me, we had a conversation as a family where we all knew, then I feel things would have been a lot better. I truly do believe that.
That's a
Yeah,
good way of looking at it. Yeah.
yeah, it's true. It's true. I think if you know, I mean, what you don't know, you don't know, But for me, I'm glad that I did forgive her. I'm glad that I was able to forgive, and the forgiveness wasn't for her; it was for me. It was for me, because hearing my children ask about her and miss her and love her, and us look at the numerous or the hundreds of photos we have of her of playing cards and laughing and whatnot. I never experienced it as in my childhood with her, but I've experienced it now with my children along with her. So that I'm so grateful for. Yeah, I'm grateful. And now that her dementia has taken a turn for the worse and it's pretty bad, um, I still have all those positive memories, not negative, but positive memories. Yeah. So I want to say I broke that curse.
Well, that's
Yeah.
good. I'm glad. Yeah, that's a good one. I'm glad you did.
Yeah. I look back at it and analyzed it, I was like, well, we really don't see patterns in our
Hmm.
behaviors as to why
Hmm.
we are the way how we are. We don't see those patterns unless you kind of look back. You got to look back.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And just hearing your story, it reminds me a little bit about mine. Like, my dad raised me majority of my life
Hmm.
from 4 years old on. I lived with my dad. And one thing he never did was talk bad about my mother. He just
Yeah.
never did. And he would never speak ill about her.
Hmm.
I grew up just like, why would my mom not want to be around? What happened? Like, why didn't she call, send letters? Like, what was going on?
Hmm.
But it wasn't until my adult life I grew up to realize it wasn't me, it was them two.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know but yeah, that was very touching. I resonated with that a lot.
Yeah. But as a
um
child, when you're not aware of the history,
yeah, yeah,
it leaves you wondering,
your
like, is
mind
it
starts
me?
to wonder.
Is it
Absolutely.
me? Am I the one that's the problem? Is it directed towards me? Do you not
Hmm.
like me? Not,
Hmm.
and as children, we don't know anything about trauma or hurt or anything. So
We have to be
those
taught. I
we
think
have
I
to be
think the
taught that.
people. Yeah, and it's our parents. As parents, it's our
Mhm.
responsibility, excuse me, to teach them to our kids, to have
Correct.
that conversation. That's the next part that we need to have is communication. There's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with telling your kids or your children at a respectable age, of course, what you've been through in your life.
Yeah.
Because
Mhm.
because honestly, what you've been through could help them avoid going through the same thing.
And it's strange you should say that, and that is why, even though the beginning of my journey in adulthood was very dark for me, it was a reason why that was the reason why I didn't hide it from my children. I could have, I mean, people's asked me, God, you told your son and your daughter about what you experienced in past relationships and whatnot. And I did, because I would rather tell them where they know versus them not knowing and wondering, why am I very selective when it comes to dating? Or why do I ask a lot of questions? Or, why am I, is I would prefer them to know than not know. So when my daughter says to me, Mommy, I was invited on a date, or whatever the case may be, I can then communicate with her and give her the tools necessary to make the decision she needs to make. Even that part is breaking those curses of the lack of communication you have in my generation, in my era being raised. You know, there was no conversations. You had to figure it out on your own.
Yeah.
It
Uh,
was, you had to figure it on your own.
which was a
So
horrible way to grow up, let me tell you.
yeah, it is. You know, every family, I feel 95% of families have some form of a generational curse. Something's happened in every family that nobody talks about. And then they wonder why they have that uncle, the aunt, the grandmother, the aunt, the dad that may act a certain way. If you probe a little bit and ask those questions, hey, why is dad or mom or whatever the case may be the way they are? I'm sure if you probe and dig deep, you will find out why. Something's happened. And most times, something traumatic has happened that either they never dealt with it, they never were given the tools, they never went to therapy or treatment or anything for it. And it's something they've had to carry with them for their life. And sometimes there's experiences, there's traumas, I would say there's demons that's happened, it's embedded in them. So if you ask those questions and not judge, and I'm speaking from experience, then you have a better understanding. And just don't cut somebody off or write them off. It's the reason.
I
It's
agree.
definitely the reason. It's a reason.
I agree. It took it for some time in my life too. I wasn't close to my mother, even in my adult life. Once I grew up and I just heard reasons why I never got calls or letters sent to me growing up with my dad, I just was like, okay, like I'm not gonna talk to you, like, but I didn't understand what she went through. I understood what she did to me and how I felt, but I never even asked or understood what she went through to be able to have that guard up, or to not have to be able to not have the means to be able to call me or write me letters or anything like that, you know?
You know,
I didn't
and
think about it.
right, and what happens is that as we become adults in our adult lives, we get stuck on hating the person, despising the person for what they put us through. And I think that narrative has to change, because I could have and I was stuck with, I would outright say, hated my mother for years, for over 10 years. I was absolutely disgusted with her and I hated her. And I was just, in my mind, she was dead to me. And no matter how often my father tried, and he tried for years to change my mind, to forgive her and to, I couldn't, I was stuck. So what happens is, and what we adults need to do is, yes, we've been hurt, and yes, our parents have done things to us, and we get stuck on how they made us feel, and the experiences, the trauma, the negative, experiences, conversations that they've made, even their actions have made us feel. We get stuck on that. The question we should be asking them is, are you okay? Nobody's probably not even asking them, are you okay? You know, are you okay? I know you and I are struggling communicating, and I'm your daughter or I'm your son. What can I do that's different? Is it something that's happened to you you've never talked about? And when you ask that question, that person, if something's happened, is going to go quiet or get very defensive, and then you got your answer. So I would say, try to probe and find out what they've experienced, what's their journey as to why they react towards you the way they do, they communicate towards you the way they do. I guarantee you they've experienced some form of trauma that you have no idea about. And I'm not saying make excuses for bad behavior. I'm not saying to forgive them for bad behaviors. Yes, they should be held accountable for it. But instead of holding that and being stuck in that feeling of disgust and hate towards them, try forgiving. And if forgiveness is not for them, it's for you. It's for you. You don't want to be stuck, because when you're stuck on hating a grandparent or a parent or whatnot, and you have children, what do you think your children are going to see? That exact same behavior. And what do you think can possibly happen? They can mimic your actions when they become adults. And then what? It's a learned behavior. You got to break it.
Right.
You got to break it. You do. And no one, and for me, listen, some of the stuff my mother and I went through, trust me, we went through it.
Girl,
Listen,
girl,
we
I'm
went
telling
through
you,
it.
I didn't even begin to tell you what we went through. And I probably won't, just because my mama would probably be listening to this podcast and call me to curse me out, and she don't curse anymore.
But
So
yeah, but and I could say, I'm glad that my father talked to me. I'm glad he was like, listen, this is it. Now, I don't know if he told me because I feel he sensed he was nearing his time to pass, because he didn't just call me, he called my other siblings as well. And he had different conversations with all of them. We found out at the funeral. So part of my conversation he had with me was really hitting him, forgive your mother. You have to promise me you can forgive your mother. And I'm glad I listened. I'm glad I have listened. Not a day goes by, I don't think about it, especially living overseas, and she's in Bermuda and she's in a home in this pandemic, but not a day goes by, I don't think about her and pray, and she's in my prayers that she's okay. I haven't seen her in over a year and a half, but I'm at peace. I'm truly at peace. And I'm glad I made the decision to forgive her. And I'm glad that my children have experienced their grandmother, and we have lots of experience and memories. It was the best thing ever.
yeah,
Yeah,
you
it
know, I
definitely
would
was.
also say, like, to communication is another part that of a generational curse that I would like to, or I have started to break in my
Yeah.
family. And it's not just communication, just, oh, let's talk about how's your day or stuff like that. It's actually having a conversation about the hard topics. And sometimes for parents too, like hard topics could be talking about sex with your kids, talking
Mm-hmm.
about relationships. Like, what, as a parent, what do you expect for them when they like a guy or a girl and you want to meet them? Like, what do you expect them to bring home to you? You know, or stuff like financial responsibility. Look, having that conversation with your kid about saving money. Like me growing up, my parents didn't talk to me about saving money. When I got my first job, it was their hand was out like it's time to pay a bill, buy some groceries or pay a light bill.
Yeah,
Yeah,
contribute to the household.
while that taught me some sort of responsibility too, I was still a kid. So I needed to save. So if I had saved when I got my first job, if they had told me to save, where would I be right now? How much money would I have right now? What
See,
would I
that's
have learned at that
yeah.
moment right now? You know? So
See, that's
I think
yeah.
it's yeah. So I think it's a couple of those conversations that we need to have, and we don't have it enough because why? We don't want our kids to be going out there having sex too early. Okay, great. Then talk to them about it. Tell them about it.
Well,
Have that conversation because the more they know about it, you will be surprised the less they would probably want to do it.
well, I know for my son, well, both my children, I know my son is sexually active, but when we had that conversation and we talked about
Let
on
me
one
put
night,
Saquon's business out there like that.
listen, I didn't call his name, you just called his name, but I'm just saying. But listen, my son's an attractive young man, and I'm not saying he's supposed to be sexually active, but he is 21 years old, and it's gonna happen. He has no children, so that's a plus, knock on wood. But
But
with
you
our
had the conversation with him
right.
though, right?
But listen,
Yeah.
I didn't just have that conversation. I had a conversation with my son and said, listen, and I was keeping it very raw with him. I was like, look, you're 21, you're very attractive, and you're established. And there may be women you meet along the way, young girls, women, whoever, that may look at you as a catch. It happens. So make sure you always protect yourself. Make sure you're always aware. No is no. Protect your safe, your health and everything. But one thing that he does know, and I've been very open about it, and I hope I don't offend anybody by this, but I did tell my son that when the day comes and he says to me that a young lady is pregnant for him, that I will not be able to be happy or get involved until the baby is born or until a DNA test is done. I have to know 100% that's my son's child. What I won't do is, and I don't care if she is his girlfriend for a number of years, it doesn't matter. One thing that, one thing for me when it comes to like children and having babies, I know of and have had and have friends that have had themselves in situations and the men don't know, when it comes to paternity of children and whatnot. So I know firsthand how some of these women are. I've come across a lot of women and I've heard some stories where I just sit there clutching my pearls, thinking to myself, you know what? These mothers have to get involved or people need to ask for DNA tests. But this is ridiculous. So I've spoken to my son about it. My son's aware of several situations of people he knows, women he knows, girls he knows, of games they play. So I've said to him right from the very beginning, whenever the day comes and somebody says anything to you that they're pregnant for you, I will be happy to be a grandmother after it's been proven that the child is yours. I need DNA, I need paternity done. I need it done. Yeah. It's nothing against the female, nothing against the girl. We can have a great relationship. I just need that solid proof.
Right.
Yeah.
That is
Solid
good.
proof.
But at least you've had the conversation of what you
Yeah.
expect and
That
what you're
way, no
going
one's
to
feelings
do.
are hurt. Yep. That way, no one's feelings are hurt. He can't say, I'm disrespecting his girlfriend or whomever he's with, or she can't say anything about, oh my God, Miss Days. Nope. And
Or where
if
did this
I,
come from? Or why would
yep,
she say
nope.
something like that? Yeah, nope, you know already.
When the
Yep.
day comes and he introduces any woman to me or any young lady to me and says, Mom, this is my girlfriend, then part of that meeting them, I would say to him politely, hey, make sure she's aware of my feelings or my viewpoints on certain things. That way there's no surprises. I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings. I'm not trying to get into any, conflicts with anybody's families and nothing like that. With the young lady's family, I'm not trying to disrespect anybody or saying anybody's daughter's a whore, nothing like that. But when it comes to that, I do not want to ever experience loving a child and thinking that child is my grandchild and giving everything I have in me for my grandchild. Listen, when the day comes and I become a grandmother, it's like me becoming a mother all over again. That baby is technically mine. I'm going to love on him or her and give them everything they ever want in life and spoil the life out of them. They can be spoiled to the gods. I do not want to think this is my grandchild and experience that and make plans for the future and making sure the blueprints laid down and, doing everything that a grandparent wants to do to find out later on is not my grandchild. I don't want to experience that.
I mean, how do you think he would feel?
Well, so to eliminate all of that, to eliminate any of those doubts, right? Get that paternity test done. I need to know. I need to know going in, I'm loving my grandchild. This is my grandchild, is my grandbaby. And I swear with everything in me to always protect and love my grandchild. That's it. It's got to be my grandchild. That's how I feel.
I mean,
And
listen,
he knows.
that's your thing. That's your
Yeah,
thing.
he
For
knows.
me, for my son, I just, he's only 13, so I can't really tell him too much or have too much of a conversation with him, but he knows stuff and he likes girls. So I have to, be open and have that conversation with him. I can't be like, you can't have girlfriends or
Oh,
you can't
no.
talk to anybody right now. Because at the end of the day, if I say no, he's gonna go behind my back and do it anyway. So let me
Exactly.
have that conversation. Let me tell him what I expect from him at this age with liking a girl, right? Or trying to quote unquote have a girlfriend and what that looks like. So it took me to have to ask him and have that conversation with him and say, hey, what do you think a boyfriend is or a girlfriend is? Like, what do you think a boyfriend and girlfriend does? For me to really understand where his mindset is, for me to have that conversation with him. So I think, for me, the stuttering was very small. The
Mhm.
financial responsibility was the next thing for me, but the biggest thing for me was communication.
Yeah.
Was talking about any and everything and having that open door policy at your own home.
Yeah. And that's why with this topic of this evening's topic we're talking about with breaking the generational curses, every family has a curse in there somewhere. They may not admit it, they may deny it, they may not want to, give it life, but everyone does. And if people stop and look at the people they struggle with of having a relationship with, it could be your mother, your father, whatever it is. It's something there. And also, don't beat yourself up. Don't beat yourself up. You may never be able to fix it. You may never find out why the person's the way how they are, but I'm positive there's some type of trauma they've experienced. But if you can find within yourself to forgive them for the feelings they put on you or having you feel a certain way, listen, forgiveness is very powerful. Forgiveness removes the black cloud on your shoulders, the weight on your shoulders, it removes everything. The power of forgiveness. And it's not that you're a sucker because you're forgiving a person, you have to forgive them. Because that's how you're going to go on with your life and enjoy, like wish them the best. Don't wish them no harm.
It takes great strength to forgive somebody, believe it or
But
not.
you have to have that strength, man, because if you don't, you'll be stuck. Listen, I've been in
Mm-hmm.
some of the most traumatic, awful experiences ever that any human being could possibly experience. I've experienced some of the most inhumane treatments you can possibly experience, but none of that has power over me. I've forgiven my domestic abuse situations. I've forgiven those two gentlemen. I've forgiven them. I held no animosity towards them. I held no space in my head. I have forgiven my mother. I have had some true forgiveness I've had to forgive for some experiences that I had to dig deep. And granted, the forgiveness didn't come overnight. We're talking about at least a few years of processing exactly what transpired. Then we're looking at a few years of, okay, not just processing, digesting it, then coming to terms with it. They coming to terms with the individuals that had caused you harm. Then once you go through all that, and then you can actually talk about situations and not get emotional or upset, then you're ready to forgive. So forgiveness doesn't come overnight to say, oh God, they did this to me today and I'm gonna forgive them tomorrow. No, 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 no. Forgiveness takes years. It took me years to forgive my two abusers. It took me years, at least a decade and a half, to forgive my mother. It took me years to forgive. I would say, about a decade and a half, years to forgive. So it's not overnight. But I can promise you, though, that once you forgive, you can start living. I promise you that once you forgive, hey, you're the happiest you could be. And you take back your control. I can promise you that much. Yeah. So I would say try it. And you may not be ready to, forgive right now. You may not be. But the day may come that you forgive you forgive the person that's caused you some type of harm or something you just don't like. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you might just find it. And you have the power to break any generational curses. It could start with your family. It started with my family. I did not want to have a bad relationship with my daughter. I identified with my mother and my grandmother, me and my mother, and I don't want that for my daughter and I. Uh-uh.
Yeah, so let's challenge. We want to challenge you guys to list 3 generational curses that you would like to change. 3 generational curses that occurred in your family, in your lifetime, that you've witnessed, that you've seen, that you would like to change. And then start today. Start
Yeah,
today.
you be the change in your family. You be the change. You can't
Absolutely.
change other people. You cannot change other people, but if you can recognize and see where an area of your life needs to be changed, where you can do better in a certain area, where you're not repeating the exact same behavior you've witnessed for the last several years, do it. Start with your family. Start with your family. Be that change.
Absolutely. I agree. Well, thank you guys for listening to another episode of Straight Talk No BS. We appreciate you guys tuning in every week. This is episode 7, and we are so excited to continue to give you guys some great content. We have a lot more coming up for you guys, events and content on our website. Check us out at www.straighttalknobs.com. Check us out on YouTube, Straight Talk No BS. Make sure you like, you share, you subscribe, and let us know what you think of our podcast, or list your generational curses in our comments. We'd love to hear from you guys. Make sure you check us out and subscribe to all of our podcast websites. That's Apple, Google, Amazon, Spotify. We're on all of them. Subscribe, like, share, and we'll see y'all guys right here next week, same time.
Thank you. Good night.